Have you ever had one of those moments when you walk into a room and suddenly forget why you're there? Or maybe you open your phone for just a second, only to realize 20 minutes have disappeared. You sleep, but you wake up tired. You take a day off, but somehow you don't feel rested. Nothing terrible is happening. Life seems normal, and yet something inside you feels worn out. Not broken, not dramatic, just tired in a way that rest doesn't seem to fix. And if you've been feeling that way lately, you're not alone. Because the truth is, your brain can begin burning out long before you realize it. Not with a loud crash, not with panic, not with obvious signs, but slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. And most people don't notice it until they can no longer ignore it. We often imagine burnout as something extreme, working 80 hours a week, having emotional breakdowns, being completely unable to function. But burnout doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it looks like losing interest in things you once enjoyed. Sometimes it looks like feeling overwhelmed by small tasks. Sometimes it looks like forgetting things more often, snapping at people you love, feeling strangely numb, or lying in bed at night with a mind that refuses to slow down. You tell yourself you're just stressed. You tell yourself everyone feels this way. You tell yourself you just need a vacation. But what if your brain has been sending warning signals for months, and you've simply gotten used to ignoring them? Because the brain doesn't suddenly stop. It adapts. And adaptation can hide exhaustion. Think about your phone battery. Imagine using it all day without ever letting it fully recharge. Eventually, it still turns on. It still works. But it drains faster. It overheats. It struggles. And little problems begin appearing everywhere. Your brain works the same way. Except unlike your phone, your brain doesn't display a low battery warning. Instead, it whispers. It whispers through brain fog, through irritability, through forgetfulness, through endless scrolling, through feeling tired but unable to relax, through that strange feeling of being mentally busy all the time. And because these things happen gradually, they begin to feel normal. But normal doesn't always mean healthy. Modern life keeps your brain in a state it was never designed to stay in. Your brain evolved to handle short periods of stress, not constant stimulation, not endless notifications, not bad news 24 hours a day, not comparing yourself to thousands of strangers online, not switching between emails, videos, messages, work, and responsibilities every few minutes. But that's exactly how many people live now. Without realizing it, the brain becomes trapped in a cycle of constant alertness, always waiting, always processing, always anticipating, and eventually always exhausted. Even when you're sitting still, even when nothing dangerous is happening, your nervous system doesn't always know the difference between a tiger and 20 unread messages. It only knows that something demands attention. Again, and again, and again. One of the strangest things about burnout is that you don't necessarily feel exhausted at first. You might actually become more productive. You push harder. You stay busy. You keep going, because being busy feels easier than slowing down. Silence feels uncomfortable. Rest feels unproductive. And somewhere along the way, exhaustion becomes your baseline. You forget what it feels like to have real energy. You forget what calm feels like. And because everyone around you seems tired too, you assume this is simply adulthood. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. Constant tiredness isn't a personality trait. Mental exhaustion isn't something you're supposed to carry forever. Maybe you've noticed that small things annoy you more than they used to. Maybe simple decisions feel strangely difficult. What should I eat? What should I watch? Should I answer that message now? Tiny questions suddenly feel exhausting. This isn't laziness. Your brain simply has limited mental energy. And decision-making uses that energy. When your mind has been overloaded for too long, even ordinary choices start feeling heavy. That's why some people stare into the refrigerator without knowing what they want, or spend 30 minutes scrolling without watching anything, or avoid simple tasks they've done 100 times before. It's not because they've stopped caring. It's because their mental resources are running low. Another sign that often goes unnoticed is emotional numbness. Not sadness, not anxiety, just numbness. You laugh less. You cry less. You feel disconnected. Good news doesn't excite you the way it once did. Bad news doesn't affect you the same either. You feel like you're simply going through the motions. Wake up, work, scroll, sleep, repeat. And because nothing feels intensely wrong, You tell yourself you're fine. But numbness isn't always peace. Sometimes numbness is what happens when the brain has been overwhelmed for too long. It's like dimming the lights to conserve energy. Not because something is broken, but because something is depleted. You might think the answer is simply getting more sleep, and sleep matters. But many people discover that even after sleeping 8 hours, they still wake up exhausted. Because burnout isn't only about sleep. It's about recovery, and recovery is different. Recovery means giving your brain moments when it doesn't have to perform, when it doesn't have to consume, when it doesn't have to solve problems, when it doesn't have to respond. But modern life rarely allows that. The second boredom appears, we reach for our phones. The second silence arrives, we fill it. The second discomfort appears, we distract ourselves. And slowly, we lose something important: mental stillness. Your brain needs empty spaces. Not because empty spaces are wasted, but because that's where restoration happens. Think about how muscles grow, not during exercise, but during recovery. The brain works similarly. It needs moments of nothing, moments without noise, without pressure, without stimulation. But many people are afraid of stillness, because stillness forces us to notice things we've been avoiding. So instead we stay distracted, and distraction becomes a lifestyle, until eventually even relaxing feels impossible. Have you ever sat down to rest only to feel restless? You finally have free time, but instead of peace you feel guilty, or anxious, or uncomfortable. You check your phone, open another video, refresh social media. Not because you want to, but because being alone with your thoughts feels unfamiliar. This is one of the hidden costs of modern exhaustion. We've trained ourselves to always be stimulated, and without stimulation our minds don't know what to do. Not because something is wrong with us, but because our brains have forgotten how to slow down, and perhaps that's why vacations don't always work. You escape work for a week, but you bring your mind with you. The same thoughts, the same worries, the same habits, the same constant stimulation. And after a few days you wonder why you still feel tired. Because burnout isn't always caused by doing too much. Sometimes it's caused by never truly stopping. Your brain wasn't designed to be available every minute of every day, but many people live that way. Notifications, texts, emails, news, videos, infinite information, infinite opinions, infinite demands. And your brain tries to process all of it, not because it's weak, but because it's human. No machine can run continuously without maintenance. Neither can you. And here's something many people misunderstand. Burnout isn't a lack of motivation. In fact, some of the most motivated people experience it. The people who care deeply. The people who try hard. The people who don't want to disappoint anyone. The people who keep saying yes. The people who push themselves because they believe resting means falling behind. But eventually the body speaks. And when whispers are ignored long enough, whispers become louder. Through insomnia, through anxiety, through brain fog, through irritability, through emotional exhaustion, not as punishment, but as protection. Your brain isn't trying to sabotage you, it's trying to save you. Sometimes we assume we need to become more productive, more disciplined, more efficient, but maybe the answer isn't always doing more. Maybe the answer is needing less noise, less comparison, less pressure, less urgency, less endless consumption. Because a mind that never pauses eventually loses its ability to feel present, and presence is something many people quietly miss. They miss enjoying simple moments. They miss feeling excited. They miss feeling alive, not because life became terrible, but because exhaustion slowly muted everything. The good news is that burnout rarely happens overnight, and healing doesn't happen overnight either. It happens slowly, quietly, in small moments, not dramatic transformations, not perfect routines, just gentle changes. Maybe it's spending 10 minutes without your phone. Maybe it's taking a walk without listening to anything. Maybe it's saying no to something unnecessary. Maybe it's allowing yourself to rest without earning it first. Because rest isn't a reward, it's a requirement. And somewhere along the way, many of us forgot that. You don't have to optimize every second. You don't have to constantly improve yourself. You don't have to turn every hobby into productivity. You don't have to answer every message immediately. You don't have to prove your worth through exhaustion, because being tired all the time isn't evidence that you're working hard enough. Sometimes it's evidence that you've been carrying too much for too long. And carrying too much eventually becomes invisible. Until one day, you wonder where your energy went, where your joy went, where your curiosity went, where you went. The truth is, your brain has been working incredibly hard, more than most people realize, handling stress, managing responsibilities, processing emotions, navigating uncertainty, trying to keep up with a world that never stops. Of course you're tired. Of course your mind feels overwhelmed. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human, and humans were never meant to operate like machines. Machines can be replaced. Brains cannot. Imagine if someone you loved came to you and said, "I'm exhausted. I can't focus. I don't feel like myself anymore." Would you call them lazy? Would you tell them to just push harder? Probably not. You'd tell them they deserve rest, patience, compassion, understanding. So why is it so hard to offer those things to yourself? Why do we become kind to everyone except ourselves? Why do we believe exhaustion must be earned before rest becomes acceptable? Maybe because we've confused being busy with being valuable. Maybe because slowing down feels scary. Maybe because we think stopping means falling behind. But behind whom? And toward what? Not every moment needs to be productive. Not every silence needs filling. Not every thought deserves attention. And not every day needs to be extraordinary. Sometimes healing begins with ordinary things. Sleeping a little earlier, watching the sunset, eating without distractions, laughing with someone you love, taking a deep breath between tasks, allowing your mind to exist without constantly feeding it more information. Simple things, human things, things we often overlook. You don't need to wait until you're completely burned out before listening to yourself. You don't need to reach a breaking point. You don't need permission to slow down, because burnout doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, hidden beneath routines, hidden beneath responsibilities, hidden beneath smiles. And because it happens slowly, we mistake survival for normal. But surviving isn't the same as living. And maybe that's what your brain has been trying to tell you all along. Not that you're failing, not that you're lazy, not that you're broken, but that you've been running on empty for longer than you realize. And perhaps the most powerful thing you can do isn't pushing harder. It's paying attention, listening, creating space, and remembering something we often forget in a world that never stops. You were never designed to be endlessly available, endlessly productive, endlessly stimulated. You were designed to rest, to recover, to breathe, to feel, to live. And maybe, just maybe, your tired mind isn't asking you to do more. Maybe it's quietly asking you to come back to yourself.